All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So we are very pleased to be joined today by the President of the International Court of Justice, Judge Joan Donoghue, and also by the Registrar of the Court of Justice, Philippe Gautier. And so without further ado, Judge, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much for your interest in the International Court of Justice. Of course, the Registrar and I know that when there are press conferences, one might be hoping for a big splashy announcement or especially information that's not publicly known. But for a court, we don't have the ability to interest you and your audiences in this way because we do our work privately and behind the scenes. But our court is very, very busy right now with many matters that have attracted great interest here in New York among the member states. So we thought it would be a good idea for us to provide just a general overview and context for the New York UN-based press, in particular to help you be aware of the broader situation so that when we do make announcements about our decisions on cases, for example, you have a little bit more of an appreciation of what those mean. So just to set the stage, the International Court of Justice was established in the UN Charter, and we decide two kinds of cases. We decide cases between countries, which we call contentious cases, and we give advisory opinions at the request of other UN bodies, usually the General Assembly. The court has been exceptionally busy recently. For example, we currently have 20 cases pending on our docket. That's a high number for us. And of those, 17 were brought during the last 5 years. So we are busy, and the cases are just continuing to come in. The cases that we're dealing with now have gotten a fair amount of attention, and a few of the more high-profile ones that I'll mention include, we have a case brought by the Gambia against Myanmar, in which it's alleged that Myanmar is violating its obligations under the Genocide Convention. We have two cases between Armenia and Azerbaijan, one brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan and the other by Azerbaijan against Armenia. And we have two cases brought by Ukraine against the Russian Federation. And then the two advisory proceedings that we now have before us are one that in which we were asked by the General Assembly to render an advisory opinion on the occupied Palestine territories, including East Jerusalem, and a second one where we've been asked to render an advisory opinion on the obligations of states in respect of climate change. So we are busy with that contentious case docket, the cases where we're deciding disputes between states, and we're engaged in the initial preparations to hear those advisory proceedings that I mentioned. I'll also just say that we have a very large number of hearings going on right now, and that the cases that we have before us involve states from all regions of the world, and the topics are quite varied. I mentioned a few that have attracted some attention, but for two states that have a case between them before us, that's the most important case. And it might be, for example, a boundary dispute or a dispute over the sovereignty over some islands that might not be well known to other states, but still is very important to them and thus very important to us. I might just now ask the Registrar to say a few more words about the procedures that we follow in advisory opinion cases, given that we have those two on the docket that came to us from the General Assembly and that will continue to be of interest to member states and to those that are interested in matters in the UN in New York. So I'll ask the Registrar if he would make a few comments on that now.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Perhaps as an introduction to say the Registrar is the head of the registry, which is the secretariat supporting the court in the fulfillment of its judicial function. And there are 117 staff members. So it's a small staff. We are the only organ of the UN away from headquarters in The Hague. And this secretariat is quite cost effective. If you look at the budget, it's $29 million per year. And it has to deal with a heavy workload. And as the President mentioned, there is a sharp increase in the activities of the court. And in the past, as a comparison, there were more or less two new cases per year. Now we have 5 cases already filed in 2023. And as the President mentioned also, until now, the court has delivered 3 judgments and also 3 orders in the prescription of provisional measures. And there are 2 judgments and 2 orders in preparation. It's quite busy. And last week there were 2 sets of hearing going on. To come back to 2023, I would add that it's an unprecedented year in terms of the number of states involved in proceedings before the court. We have 85 states appearing, either intervening in some procedure, and that's the case of 32 states intervening in the contentious case between Ukraine and Russia, 32. 57 entities from among 53 states file comments, written submissions in the advisory opinion concerning the Palestine situation. And we have 18 contentious cases involving 2 or more states. If you add up, it's more than 85, of course, because there are some states appearing in different cases, in advisory opinion, but also in contentious cases. 85 is quite a number. It's more or less 50% of the UN involved. And just to finish, to complete regarding advisory opinions, whenever there is a question asked to the court, the first situation, the first decision to be made by the court is to fix the written procedure. And during this written procedure, every member state and also those intergovernmental organizations identified as likely to provide information may submit comments. And that's the reason for the first wave, the first set of comments, there were 57 entities, states and intergovernmental organizations. There is a second wave, a second set of comments, and the procedure, the written procedure, will be completed by 25 of October, this week. After that, the date for the hearing will be announced for next year. That I will stop here, Madam President.
Very good. Thank you so much. Let me now open the floor for some questions. Please go ahead. Please introduce yourself and tell us which media you represent.
My name is Volodymyr Ichenko. I'm a Ukrainian journalist from a national news agency of Ukraine, Ukrinform. I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned several cases that you are considering. Can you give us any details about the Ukraine against Russia case, please?
Yes, I can. And of course, you'll appreciate that when we talk about our cases, we can describe them in a way that conforms with what's been known publicly. There are 2 cases pending before the court that were brought by Ukraine against the Russian Federation. In the first of those cases, which was filed well before the operation that the Russian Federation calls a special military operation, in that case, Ukraine is alleging that Russia is violating its obligations under a convention on the financing of terrorism, and the allegations relate to events in eastern Ukraine, starting in 2014. And in the second piece of that same case, Ukraine is alleging that the Russian Federation is violating its obligations under a convention that's called the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racism. And in that convention, race is defined to include ethnicity. So persons of Ukrainian ethnicity or Crimean Tatar ethnicity would be considered to be a race under that convention. And the allegation there is that the Russian Federation is violating its obligations in the treatment of those people. We are not asked by Ukraine to pass judgment on the legality of the way that the Russian Federation acquired control of Ukraine, of Crimea in 2014. We're looking at its conduct there. And this is a common challenge for us in our work, because sometimes states consent to the court's jurisdiction to interpret and apply particular treaties. And when they do that, our jurisdiction is limited to the scope of that treaty. And so in the case I just mentioned, Ukraine has identified 2 treaties to which Ukraine and the Russian Federation are parties, and they've alleged violations of those 2 treaties. But we don't have scope in that case to look at other issues, such as the legality of the way that Crimea was incorporated into the Russian Federation, or the use of force. Now, the second case that we have is pending before us, and it was brought by Ukraine a few days after the operation in February 2022 started. And in that case, Ukraine is invoking as the basis of jurisdiction the Genocide Convention. And Ukraine is arguing that Russia falsely accused Ukraine of committing genocide and then used that false accusation as a predicate for its operation. Right now, what we are doing in that case is we are considering the objections of the Russian Federation to our jurisdiction. So in the first case that I mentioned, we are being asked to decide whether there are violations. We've had a hearing and it's under deliberation in the court. In the second case, that was brought right after the operation in February of 2022, the question for us now is whether the court has jurisdiction to continue to go forward, because the Russian Federation has opposed, has argued that we don't have jurisdiction. So that's an overview.
Another question a little bit different. What is your attitude to the idea of establishing an international tribunal to bring Russia to justice for the crime of aggression?
It's not something that I would express a view on as the president of the court, and I wouldn't expect the court to express a view on it either. I mean, we follow events. We're aware of all kinds of initiatives out there, including that one, but it's not something it would be appropriate for me to express a view on.
And the third question.
Yeah.
Sorry. It is known that Russia didn't sign the UN Charter. Perhaps that's why it violates so much. After the disappearance of the USSR, there was no decision of the General Assembly of the Security Council on the continuity of the Soviet Union in the form of Russia in the UN structures. How do you personally assess the legitimacy of Russia's membership in the UN Security Council and the UN in general?
My essential response to that is to be skeptical of your appreciation of the factual situation, because it's my understanding that when the Soviet Union dissolved into a series of states, there were a series of events that gave rise to the recognition of those various successor states, including Russia. So I don't have anything more to say about it than that.
Ephraim?
Thank you so much for this briefing. Ephraim Kosaifi from Arab News. Thanks, even though you don't have big announcements. Great to see you. I have a question on the advisory opinion on the Israeli occupation. Any details you could give us would be very much appreciated on where we're at right now with the process. I know last time we heard there were 58 countries, if I'm not mistaken, who presented their comments, or I don't know how you call it, opinions on the. Are there more countries? Is the door still open? Where are we at in the case? I'm hearing the Palestinians are a little bit impatient also to hear the opinion you're going to render. That's my first question.
Yeah, I'll answer that question. And so first of all, in terms of the timing, the request was filed, was presented to us in January of 2023. And it was adopted here, but for some reason there was a delay. It was adopted here on the 30th of December. And the question from the General Assembly comes to us after it's been presented by the General Assembly. And it's a complicated and quite detailed set of questions. It's not just one question. The court set a deadline that we set trying to balance the desire on the part of the proponents to move quickly on the one hand against the importance for to allow time for member states to prepare meaningful submissions and for the court to benefit from well-prepared submissions. And that's what led us to set 25 July as the deadline for this first round. So the first round is behind us. If that's what the registrar was referring to when he said that we had received, I think it's 57, that's including the observer state of Palestine and the, so we have member states, the observer state of Palestine, and 3, if I recall, international organizations. Then the next thing that will happen is that on the 25th of October, so this week, all of those that submitted those initial statements have an opportunity to submit another round of written statements in which they're supposed to react to those others. So they have them. They can look at them and they can support another one or disagree. And so that's a lot of paper, as you can see. And then the court plans to hold its hearings in that case in February of 2024. So then after that, and in fact, we've just put out a press release today with the deadline, with the dates. So see, I do have something to tell you that's timely. So the hearing will open on Monday, 19 February 2024. And we set that date in particular because as you may know, there are elections for the International Court of Justice to be held in a week or two. And the composition of the court will change in early February. And so this is about the earliest possible in the next composition of the court that we can hold a hearing, because I'll step down as president on, I think, the 5th or so of February. New judges will join the court the next day. The court will elect a new president and vice president. They'll have to get themselves settled, and so that they have made this advisory opinion their first order of business, if you will, in the next triennium. That's what we call it. Then the question, well, when will there be an opinion? The court doesn't announce the dates on which it plans to issue opinions until all the work is done, until essentially the final proofreading, because we never want to set expectations that we can't meet. So I can't give you a specific date. I can say that it will be a period of several months at least before, based on our practice and given the volume of the record that I mentioned and the complexity of the questions, this is not something that will be swiftly disposed of. I won't be part of it, but I can say with confidence that it will be looked at carefully and thoroughly by all the judges on the court.
We're also covering the case between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Can you give us details on that? And the question is, the recent events, the very drastic, dramatic recent events with thousands and hundreds of thousands of Armenians leaving the enclave, has that disrupted the process? How did that affect your work on this case?
Yeah. So we have 2 cases between those 2 states. One brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan and the other brought by Azerbaijan against Armenia. In the case that was brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan, that was brought in 2021, I believe, so before these events. But it was focused on allegations by Armenia about the treatment of persons of Armenian ethnicity in Nagorno-Karabakh. And Armenia, both of those states have, in those 2 cases, several times sought the court's intervention through a procedure that's called provisional measures. And provisional measures are measures that a court imposes to essentially to preserve the rights that are at issue in the case until the final end of the case where the court disposes of the case. And so recently, September 27th, I believe, Armenia filed, the most recent request was around that. Sorry, it's not quite right, but Armenia filed a request for provisional measures with us. And that request was based on allegations that that Azerbaijan was discriminating on the basis of ethnicity against the Armenians, and asked us to impose provisional measures about the treatment of the persons who remained, and about the persons who might want to come back, et cetera. And that's one of the two cases on which we had a hearing last week. So last week, we had a hearing in the case brought by Armenia against Azerbaijan, not to decide the ultimate resolution of the case, but rather for us to consider whether measures that Armenia requests should be imposed. By the time we had the hearing, the press reports, which I think seem to be verified, were indicated that almost the entire population had already moved out of Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia in general, but not exclusively. So we are currently seized with that request for provisional measures. So that's that.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
Arul Luis from Indo-Asian News Service. I would like you to speak about the opinion sought on the climate change issue. It sort of seems like it's pushing the envelope of what is conventionally considered the legal issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The General Assembly presents questions to the court, and that both of the advisory opinions that have been presented to the court recently contain complicated and multifaceted questions, not simple, straightforward questions. And the court, as one of its initial considerations when it receives requests for an advisory opinion, has to look at whether it wants to formulate the questions in a manner that will provide the best advice. And so I'm not going to make any prediction about whether it will do anything with this particular one. But it's a very dense question, and the court will fully appreciate the desire of the General Assembly to hear from it on each of these issues. But it also has scope to form its own appreciation of the best way to be responsive to the General Assembly.
Do we have additional questions in the room? No, then if that's it, thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Thank you also to all of you for being here this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.